In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a fabric basket. This is a fully lined basket that has batting and interfacing in it, so it'll stand up on its own. And you can use these for gift bags, organizing, or whatever you want. And you can fold them over or just leave them full. They're about 10 inches tall. So there is a link in my description to get the template for this. For the fabric basket project, you're going to need a main fabric and a lining fabric. I'm using quilting cotton for these, but you can also use a thicker canvasy fabric if you want. And then you'll need fusible, interfacing, lightweight, and batting for stability. You'll also need double fold 1-inch binding. This is quilt binding. We're gonna bind the top of the basket. And then you can print the pattern piece for the base on my website, and there's a link in the description. So the first thing we're gonna do is cut out the base pattern piece from all 4 of our layers. So we have the interfacing, the main fabric and the lining fabric, and the batting. So we have 4 layers of the base, and then for the main part of the basket, we're going to cut out rectangles that are 10 inches tall by 22.4 inches long. It's a little bit of a weird measurement, but that is the measurement we're going to need to get this around the base. So 22.4, so just find 22.5 and cut it a little bit shorter than that. So you'd want the main, interfacing, lining, and batting again. So the first thing we're going to do is fuse the interfacing to the back of the main fabric. So line up your interfacing, and we're going to press it with an iron. Make sure the sticky part is down. The rough side has adhesive glue on it, and we don't want to get that on our iron. Then once you've done that, if your interfacing is too big, we can just trim it off so that it doesn't get in our way. Okay, and then I'm going to fuse the interfacing to the back of the base piece as well. Now we're going to stack the main fabric on top of the batting, and we're going to treat this as one piece. If you have a fusible fleece, you can fuse it to the back of the main fabric, and that will keep it all together. But if you don't, we'll just treat it as one piece, and we'll do it that way. We're going to first baste across the 2 long edges, since this is not a fusible batting. And then we're going to also baste around the circle of the base of the main fabric and the batting. So we'll baste 3/8 inch from the edges. Okay, after you've basted your batting to the back of your main fabrics, what we're going to do is start putting the basket together. Just a side note, if you want to interface or add batting to your lining to make it extra sturdy, you can totally do that. You'll just need a little extra batting and interfacing. So if you want to do that now. And then for this basket assembly, what we're going to do first is pin the short edges of the main basket piece together, and then we'll sew it. If your batting is sticking out a little, you might want to trim it so that your seam allowances are easier to gauge. Okay, so I'm just going to lay these together and pin them. This will be kind of a side seam. There's only one on this basket, and it's going to make a tube for us to pin to the base. So that, I'm actually going to trim a little batting off of here too. Alright, so that we're using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that your side seam is sewn, what we're going to do is pin the base into the tube of the main fabric. And so a good way to start this is we have one side seam, and then if you lay it flat and crease, we can create a halfway mark over here. And then we'll cut that in half again just to kind of give us a guide. So match up the pin you just did with the seam you made, crease over on this side. And we'll do that one more time over here. This will kind of give us an even way of pinning these together. Okay, and then we can do that with this piece too. I'm going to use a marker to mark. So the way to do that is fold your circle in half like a taco, and then we'll mark in that crease and in this one here, and then we'll fold these together, match up those purple lines, do the same in this corner and this corner. There we go. Okay, so now we'll start out by pinning the lines that I made on the circle with the main fabric. And this last one will match up to the seam here. And then now that we have those kind of in place, we can go ahead and add pins around the rest of the circle. If you have basted that fabric, you can use that thread to kind of pull and guide your fabric as needed. And if you need to stretch your fabric or batting around to get the pins in place, you can do that. The more pins you use on this, the less likely you are to have tucks as you sew. And sewing a curve like this is tricky, so I like to use a lot of pins on this step. But you can kind of see how our basket's starting to take shape. We're kind of making a cylinder with fabric. After you've pinned really well, we're going to sew around the edge at 3/8 inch, and since we've already basted the batting on, we already have a guide, so we're just going to follow that seam line, that stitching line again with a regular stitch length. After you have sewn that seam, you'll see your basket should stand up. We're going to turn this right side out, You don't really need to clip those curves because it's so thick, it'll just kind of work out. And then we'll sew the lining the same way. Sew the side seam and then the base together. And then what we're going to do is leave this inside out, and we'll slip it into the main fabric one. And if you want to just offset your seams here so that it doesn't get too bulky, you can put them near each other, but just don't put them on top of each other. And then we're going to line up the top edges here and baste them together. So we'll just pin around the top of the basket with the 2 layers together. You might have to stretch the top, the main fabric, to get it to fit a little bit, because with all the layers the main fabric has underneath it, it'll make it less stretchy. But they should fit together fairly easily. And then we'll just baste around the top. With your top basted, pull out your quilt binding, and we're going to start binding this over the top of this basket, just sandwiching it in between the layers. So we're going to line up the crease of the middle, the quilt binding, with the top of the basket, and then we'll just pin it. I'm going to pin it down so that I can sew along the bottom edge. When you get back to where you started, what we're going to do is we'll trim the binding, and then we'll want about 1 inch overlap, and then we'll press this under about 3/4 inch. And just overlap it. So this is just the easy way to overlap that to get a nice finish. That way you won't have any raw edges. And then what we're going to do now is top stitch around the basket, getting all these layers together. And what I like to do is top stitch near the edge of the quilt binding, but not too close, because we want to make sure we get the back on there too. And I'm going to take the pins out as I sew. Once your binding's secured at the top, you are all finished and your basket is ready to go. So you can also fold the edges down, since you have a nice clean finish, if you want to make the basket a little shorter. And these are so fun to fill with gifts. You can do tissue paper and create like a little gift basket with these, or organize toys or fabric even. So I hope you enjoy this project. Go ahead and get the template on my website.